Hey there, this is Perch, and a question came up on one of the comment fields about creators that go on hiatus, and when they come back, kind of what's the impact to their run? And it's a good question because this has happened a lot throughout the years where creators have come and gone, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. Kind of just take a step back on the topic for a moment. A lot of comics, particularly today, the editorial staff, the editors, are basically, they're picking the portfolio of people they want on their titles, and it's not like it's completely in a vacuum, but there are styles and trends that go on where editors will come in and they will pick the team that they want to work with or a team they're comfortable with or usually under the guise of this is a team that fits the title. But it's somewhat about networking. It's somewhat about proven sales. There's this desire to kind of find a new voice. Sometimes it's money management. There's a lot of things that go into that. And frankly, this whole topic is a show unto itself of how do creators get chosen and what trends do you see and what kind of decision making process goes in, because sometimes that decision making process is pretty suspect. If you get a editorial staff that has a certain I'm reluctant to use the word agenda because that will trigger a bunch of people down a different path. So I'm more a style. You get an editorial team that has a certain style that they want to cultivate, then you'll get creators that match that style. And sometimes it's for the best, sometimes it's not. It's putting a lot of power in the hands of these editors, which sometimes well earned, sometimes not. Again, a good so back to the initial question though is what happens when a creator vanishes for a while and then comes back into the picture? What happens to their sales? Well, short answer is if with a writer, there's definitely an impact. So and keep in mind, I'm sweeping aside for the moment things that are different, or things that are going to weight the sales one way or another. Like for example, if your most popular character in your entire publishing arm is Wolverine, and you have a creator that takes a 10-year hiatus, comes back, and you put them immediately on Wolverine, then yeah, it's going to sell well. But that has more to do with Wolverine than the creator, than the writer that's attached to it. Generally speaking, if you just look at hard numbers, when writers take time off or disappear and then come back, there is a dip. It's not a huge dip in sales, but a lot, especially in the last 10 years or so, writers have started to cultivate really a following. So people will come in and follow writers. Bendis is a good example of somebody over the last 20 years where the name of Bendis would cause people to follow him onto books that they wouldn't normally buy. And so the writer kind of obtains that credibility and that following, and then sales follow. Now, if Bendis suddenly disappeared for, you know, uh, 5 years or so, you would see an impact. His name has been built up a lot, so you're not going to see that worth nothing, but you will start to see that asset diminish. And a good example of this is probably Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont was the guy who could do no wrong for a long time at Marvel, and then there was some movement around, work for a different publisher, and then there was kind of a return, but it didn't seem like editorial and the company really got behind it. The business was changing a lot. Suddenly, there were a lot of comments around Chris Claremont's voice and writing style no longer fit the times, which is just a tragedy. I remember when I heard that for the first time, it just you get that sick kind of feeling in your stomach of what are you talking about? What are you doing? Um, but over the years, and Chris Claremont is, as some may know, and if you don't, if this is a surprise, and definitely there's a video on this, and one is coming about just Claremont in general. Claremont's under an exclusive contract with Marvel today. They've got him on the shelf today. He's sitting there. He's an asset. Yes, you have to pay him, of course, but here's a guy who is pin out, ready, willing, anxious to work on Marvel things, and he's gotten a small little handful of kind of backup stories and other things. And I mean, granted, Claremont is you got to pay him, and he's going to be more costly than just Joe Schmo off the street because he does bring credibility, but he brings credibility. That's kind of the whole point. I think if you put Chris Claremont on a title, if you announced, hey, we're going to do, I don't know, even if it wasn't a top level title, if it was like, The Defenders, brand new series, and Claremont's going to be writing it, and we're going for a 5-year run here. So buckle up. It would sell. Chris Claremont's name would sell it. Now, if you did this experiment 10 years ago, his name would have sold it more. And if you would have done it, 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, it would have sold amazingly well. So there is some depreciation from writers. Artists is kind of a little different. So with artists, there are styles that get aped and get copied, and then that will definitely depreciate the value of that book. So if a good example of that is there got to be a lot of people that drew like Rob Liefeld, and so Rob Liefeld himself saw some depreciation of attention toward his book. Now, don't get me wrong. Liefeld demands a nice high page rate, and no knocking Liefeld. He sells books, but having having so many kind of copycat styles meant that over time he wasn't in as kind of hot demand. His name alone would not blow books out the door like it did in the 90s. Again, that's not a knock against Liefeld. It's pretty normal. If George Perez suddenly came back and was put on a big book, his name as a draw from where it was in say the 80s is not as strong as it used to be, but he'd still bring people. Artists do not depreciate in the same way as writers because if you like the style, if it's nice and clean, I mean, put it this way: if suddenly Marvel announced, "Hey, we're doing a Spider-Man book with Todd McFarlane," it's going to sell really, really well. It's going to sell, and would it sell as well as say 90, 91, 92? Probably not, but it's going to sell still really, really strong. It's nowhere near the kind of depreciation you get if you said, "Hey, Chris Claremont's returning to the X-Men." That wouldn't have as big a bump, even though as a fan, I'd be just all over that. So, when creators take breaks, either because they want to or because they're kind of forced to by circumstance, then there is an impact to their sales. Now, I guess I'll cap it by saying this. If there is an impact to their sales, if things do decrease, then all it usually takes for an artist is a couple issues of strong performance and everything is just fine. So, an example of this would be when Joe Mad came back and did Ultimates 3, which was a dreadful story. There was a kind of, strong interest in Joe Mad doing work, but not at the level which we saw when he was doing Uncanny. And even some of the Battle Chaser stuff, there was a lot of hype around him. And he came in to do Ultimates 3, and there was almost oh, I remember him. He was pretty cool. And then people pick up the book like, oh, holy crap, and then they buy. And then they're suddenly, trying to scramble to get some back issues. And again, Ultimates 3 was a funny series because it's been so panned as just terrible. Yet that time period where the book came out was like you could not keep that book on the shelves, and it sold really, really well despite the fact that almost universally everybody said it was a just terrible story. So, and be that as it may, artists can get their interest renewed back in their name pretty quickly. Writers can as well, but usually a little tougher. Now, the another kind of caveat to everything I've just said is when a writer kind of strikes out on their own and does independent work, and then kind of comes back into the fold and starts to write, not just write, a writer or artist or creative talent, anyone creative talent. You see that with some of the Image folks who came back and then started to do, like Jim Lee or Mark Silvestri during that last kind of storyline with Grant Morrison on New X-Men. There definitely are cases where artists come back or they go into the indies. People are not as aware of them there, although the indies are not. Even 15 years ago, indie comic books and publishers that weren't Marvel and DC were a little bit harder to find. Today, there's enough trade paperback sales and recognition. Enough of these titles have sold into the movies or Netflix shows or what have you that's not a problem anymore. It's doing just fine. So there you go. Definitely an impact, not the worst impact, and generally creators can recover. I think the one exception to this is if a creator exits in just a really obnoxious way and just torches the world behind them. Then I think not only do you have the problem where no editor wants to touch them, but also some of that leaks into the fans, and then there's just a cynicism about the work that people just can't seem to get over. It's a shame because a little bit of this has happened with John Byrne, who obviously an absolutely incredible talent. Still great work. At this point, you look at his work, and he's people have said, "Oh, his stuff's very dated now." Not really. I mean, his stuff is detailed and amazing, and I think you put John Byrne on a title and it would sell. The fans would absolutely love it. But John Byrne, the man, did a pretty effective job of torching some of his reputation with people, both kind of in comics editors who kind of started to credit him as somebody who's very hard to work with, and even some fans who saw his message board and saw some of the things he said. So it's a tough road for creators when they really kind of make a strong controversial name outside the comics that has an impact. It's sometimes hard to determine, and if you're super talented, you can come back and do things, and certainly put your name out there. But if you irritate the publisher and the editors enough, then you're not worth the headache for them. And some there's I might as well people ask that about Ethan Van Sciver a lot. Is when does he come back to one of the big publishers and do work there, and would they take him back? And I mean, it's a two-sided question. Does Ethan Van Sciver want to come back to comics, or want to come back to, sorry, one of the big two publishers? I mean, I don't know. I think he's making good crowdfunding money on his own. That's worked out for him. So depending on kind of the longevity of what he's doing with crowdfunding, it would be a pay cut. And so it becomes something about passion. If you're Ethan Van Sciver and you say, I've always, my career's not done until I've done a legendary, I don't know, Batman run or Spider-Man run, then sure, he might want to come back and do something there, and have that be kind of a you know a passion project, if you will. But and the other argument is, will the crowdfunding money hold up? I mean, who knows? Probably not. Just if we're talking about just pure trends of how things come and go and things get funded and not funded, will it sustain this level? I mean, hard to say. I mean, could be. It's if it doesn't sustain, it's not really because of anyone who's doing crowdfunding. It's just the medium itself. People will drift into doing something else, or other avenues will open up. Um, the other side of the token is, would the publishers want to work with an Ethan Van Sciver? And I mean, the short answer here, and we're all very close to it, I think, because a lot of noise and stuff has been stirred up right now. People might have a different answer, but if, a few years from now, if Ethan Van Sciver's a draw who's going to make money and has a fan base that's going to buy comics, then yeah, a publisher's going to give him work. I think that, a lot of people can take moral stands of, no, I won't work with this guy again because I'm objects to what he says morally. That sounds good, but that's not something you can take to a bank. It's not something you can tell shareholders. If you have a bankable property, you're going to work with that person again. And case in point, Mel Gibson's out doing some movies now, not the level he was, but somebody's giving him money, and Hollywood is littered with talent that has irritated somebody politically or socially, or who knows. And here they are getting work. Jussie, good old Jussie of Empire. Will he return to Empire or not? Who knows? But if the determination is Jussie is a draw, then Jussie will be on another show. It's a money making business. It's not a virtue business. So if the argument is made that Ethan Van Sciver is going to sell books and he's going to get work, I think it's that simple. Now, if some of the people who have really become frustrated with him and he had some real battles with, and and all of that, are the editors making the choice? Then probably not. They're not going to want to solicit him for the project. And if there is concern that the noise level of a Van Sciver is larger than the sales, then in the same token, even if somebody's going to produce a lot of sales for the comic, if it's going to come with a lot of controversy and frustration and shenanigans you got to work around, then yeah, then nobody's going to go in on that talent, because it's too much headache for the money. The value to money is too high. I'm not saying that's where Van Sciver is. I'm not sitting in the office of the publishers. I have no idea. The world of Twitter and social media and what goes on there is not, not equivalent to profits and sales and all the rest. So who knows? Who knows what people are thinking, and how people are curating their books. The one thing is true about comics is that things change. There are different eras, different decades, and how the industry will look 10 years from now is going to be very different from how it looks 20 years from now, or how it looks today. Things are always changing. There was a time period when people said they didn't want to, that Mark Miller was a pain to work with, and hey, he's got his Netflix deal and pretty strong selling comics coming out. So you know, and granted, he's doing it on his own. Of course, it's not apples to apples. But if you don't think that Marvel would, if Mark Miller approached Marvel and said, you know what, I want to do a 12-issue run on, pick a character. Yeah, he's probably getting it. I mean, he brings too much value for them to say no, and so that's how it bounces. But anyway, I hope that answered the question. What if a creator takes a hiatus and they come back? Is there a dent to their career? Yeah, there is, and it varies a little bit by the creator and whether it's a writer or an artist. But that's kind of how it all shakes out, at least from what I can see on the ground. That's how it kind of comes to be. So I hope you liked the video. Go ahead and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. That'd be awesome. Hit notification if you want to be notified, and follow me on Twitter. It's Comic Perch at Twitter, and would love to have your suggestions and topic ideas like this one. And I'll be happy to ramble on about it. Thanks a lot.